Hello and welcome everybody to According to Andrew number 68. I just had some random thoughts on some AI stuff, some nap, which is not aggressive principle, not whether or not you should take a nap throughout the day, and social moral fiber. So let's get into it. So we're going to start with AI, and if I can find my thing here. So I know a lot of people are worried that AI is going to take over and it's going to dominate the whole thing, and that might be a legitimate concern, but I personally just don't see it, and I'll kind of get into why. So automation can never possibly take over, but it can render certain sections of the population obsolete. No matter what, there will always need to be somebody that creates by hand the tools to automate things, and on the top there is going of that there are all the inventions and designs that go into the machine that needs to be done effectively by hand too, because whenever you automate a process, there like inevitably it goes back to having to do things by hand. Somewhere along the line, you're gonna have to have a human interact with that thing, and the more complex and more automation that you add, it actually increases the amount of hands-on people you need because you need all this other infrastructure to support that level of automation. And so, despite it seeming like, oh, all these jobs are going to get automated, that's not going to happen. But there are concerns. So, as automation becomes, uh, as automation starts to automate automatic processes, so basically robots building robots, it simply grows the base of the pyramid where more and more non-automated things are needed to service, create, and maintain the machines. Some may argue that this will become irrelevant with AI, as it will be able to outcreate us, but I doubt it. AI will be able to make the most efficient thing that has ever existed, but it cannot create, which uh, which has it cannot create which has not existed before and bring it into being. Uh, that requires a divine spark that AI simply does not have. However, as these machines get more complex and automation is stacked on top of itself, it will require a higher and higher IQ population to make and maintain these systems, and some of the lower IQ population uh, people of the society will not have a place in that society. So that is, so in a sense, they are correct that it might put some people out of work permanently, potentially, and that is a concern. I don't know exactly how to address that, but it's not going to take the form that they kind of make it out to be. Uh, this will cause social issues, and I believe will lead to a collapse of the societies where the average IQ is too low for the technology. Uh, Besides lacking the amount of people needed to maintain the complex machinery of the society, you will have a critical mass of people who are disenfranchised with a new technology, and this group will topple the society and bring it back to a level uh, in conformance with its average IQ. So what I mean by that is, uh, as things get more and more complicated, if like let's say 50% of your population can't work and doesn't have a job and doesn't have a means to take care of itself, they're gonna be like, what's the point of having this? They're gonna collapse the society and they're gonna basically go back to a level of society that they can. Now the problem with this, as Vox Day has pointed out, is uh, let in the third world, get the third world. Uh, we're seeing that the lowering of the IQ standards in America has made it so we can no longer maintain things that are normal to Western civilization, and that includes indoor plumbing. So if you can't maintain these systems, that means you can't get the benefits of these systems, like advanced infrastructure with indoor plumbing and electricity and all that stuff. And you can get back to that point potentially, but you're going to have to kind of revert yourself and kind of build up the building blocks and kind of understand the underlying and fundamental aspects of it. There's a certain amount of like maintenance that you can do to it, but you can't build on top of it. You can't, or if you do, it's very crude and usually makes things worse, as we kind of see with a lot of updates to like Windows and stuff like that. A lot of times it makes things worse, and people are really upset with that. And that's partially because, um, partially because of bloat, and partially because of uh, the people that are building on top of it don't know the foundation and the fundamental stuff that they're building on top of, and so they don't can't actually build it properly, and it causes issues. And the original people that did build it are no longer there, not with the company or things of that nature. Maybe moved up to a higher management role and therefore don't directly deal with that kind of stuff anymore. That stuff. So getting back to this, the top of society. This is one of the aspects that is plaguing America right now, as the IQ is dropping, and therefore the complex systems it has in place cannot be maintained by the populace, and those disenfranchised by the complex society are growing to a critical level. This is one of the points of contention within our society that's growing, and this and part of it is, yeah, there's the dumbing down of America, but another part of it is this disenfranchisement has really just resulted from manufacturing jobs being exported, and therefore it's not necessarily that those jobs don't exist and that some of the people in the society couldn't do those jobs. It's that those jobs don't exist in America anymore because they were shipped off to China. So that wraps up the AI portion of this. And then, okay, so talking about non-aggression principles. So I'm reading, what is it called? The Origins of the Second World War. And it's very interesting in this book because it talks about, what does it talk about in the Origins of the Second World War? So it basically, it's talking about like all the concessions and stuff like that that the Axis are getting, and kind of the dynamics between the different powers and how things developed and why Italy ended up on Germany's side, which is very interesting, because it was, and why they didn't necessarily work well with each other, because it was just kind of the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. Like they didn't really want to work together or see each other as allies, much so as like, oh, I guess I have to work with you. And I guess there's maybe an aspect of that in the ally side as well, but mainly between France and Britain. But well, France was knocked out of the war pretty early, so that wasn't a concern. And then America, with its idealism, generally, because the idealism makes it so that they, when you're in alliance with them, they fundamentally work with each other more. Uh, so that's a pretty big deal. But I think it kind of highlights some of the folly of the non-aggression principle, because you can see from all of these lessons, like they just fought the Great War, right? The war to end all wars, and so that basically war is not an option. They can't. It's not on the table. It's not something they want to do. And so because one of the sides is willing to go to war and the other side is not, now he makes the point that the Axis doesn't really want to go to war, but they will use it as a means to an end. And if they have to go to war, fine. But they're basically betting that their desire to not go to war is going to overpower it. Basically, they're not going to call his bluff because Hitler is a notorious gambler, right? He he'll be like, they're not gonna do this. This is one of the reasons that they went into Russia so hard, and that was one of his gambles that didn't pay off. But a lot of his early ones did, moving soldiers into the Rhineland when it was demilitarized, and then France not responding. And so, in sense, like they say that if someone commits aggression against you and stuff like that, that you can use aggression. But this is the predicament that France got itself into because they needed to use aggression in an aggressive manner, but they couldn't because they hadn't been hit first, right? It's like uh, the a good example is what is it, Black Hawk Down, the movie. So there's a scene in there where uh, they're like getting ready and they're like sitting there and they can see the people that are obviously enemy combatants that they need to shoot, but they can't shoot at them because they haven't been shot at yet. And so they like hear all these guns and this guy's like, when can we start shooting? He's like, once you hear a whiz. He's like, does that count? He's like, no, that's not a count. And all of a sudden you hear a bullet fly by their heads, and then he's like, now you can start shooting. But it's like, they got the first shot off. What if that had gone through your head and you're dead now? You know, like, and so it's like because you're restricted in this way, it really boxes you in what you can do, and you effectively, while in a sense you have the right to defend yourself and use violence to defend yourself, it puts you in such a corner that people who are not willing to go along with this non-aggression principle can use it to abuse you into doing what they want effectively, and you uh, just through the threat of violence, and because they haven't actually done anything, um, they haven't actually used the violence against you yet. There's ways that they can paint you into a corner that make it so that you can't actually respond to with aggression when sometimes it might be your only option to maintain the status quo and get things back in check, which I find kind of interesting. So it's just kind of another one of those limits, and the reason it's limited is because it comes with the inherent thing that I don't want to commit violence against other people. It's something I'm going to look to avoid. So the people who are inherently don't care about that and are going to break it, who are going to be the people that you need to use aggression against to keep in check and in line, whether that's throwing them in jail or whatever the thing is that you need to arrest them, things like that. Those people aren't going to respect that, and so you have this lopsided um, table to negotiate at, basically, where you have basically removed some of your bargaining and leverage options, which just gives them such an advantage that they can leverage you into positions over and over again that puts you at a massive disadvantage. So that is that little bit. And then I wanted to kind of touch on what is the moral fabric of society, because Owen makes this point a lot, where the lowest common denominator in society is what dictates society. I think he's right, but I think it actually has to do with a very particular class within the society too. Um, so let's dive into it. So Owen makes the point that the lowest common denominator in morality in society is how the society will be treated, and uh, how the laws get enforced. Now, I don't think that means that you have to have a group of moral people, and if there's one immoral person, that the society will conform to that. But if the moral society does not deal with this immoral person, the society will slowly, over time, start conforming to the lower moral level if that person is not excised from the group. But the question is, who creates and maintains these standards? Historically, I believe this has been the middle class. If you look at Victorian England, the Victorian England social rules of the time, the extreme chastity, which was only really followed by the middle class. There was apparently more prostitutes per capita in Victorian England than any other time in recorded history. This could be indicative of the Churchian type thing, where people put up a facade as their actions belie their and their actions belie their words. It could also be indicative of the true cultural enforcement of society is the middle class. It is possible that the middle class has strong family structure. Not to say that the lower class people don't, but those that made it to the middle class did so through strong interfamily relations. And those in the lower class that have strong interfamily relations will make it to the middle class eventually. It might take some time. It might take a generation or two. Those family relations lay the bedrock of social structure. This is why the middle class is shrinking. Those strong family values that brought families up to the middle class are missing. The causes that uh, the strong family values that brought families to the middle class are missing, and this causes them to sink back to the lower classes, where they are allowed or raised to the upper classes because oh, they sink back to the lower classes because that's where moral degeneracy is basically allowed, or they go to the upper classes because the upper classes never followed the rules either, because they made some Faustian deal and basically sacrificed their family to get shot up to the next level. Uh, I would like to note that those in the upper class that got there through there are some that got there through family ties. So but it's not gonna be your billionaire type people. Like uh, Tucker Carlson might be like the highest level person that has a strong family that I can think of. Uh, but if you look at your Bill Gates type people, your Elon Musk, your the people that were clearly kind of put there. Jeff Bezos, though Jeff Bezos, he had some novel ideas, but they like those people who have the what is it, imposter complex, the ones who know that they were picked and put there, that it wasn't there, they didn't get there by their merit. Those people basically sacrificed their family to shoot up to the upper class. They took the Faustian deal. Whereas there are some that made it there through their families, whether it's but usually they're not going to be the top of the top. They're going to be kind of your upper middle class, lower upper class. They're breaking in a couple million a year. They're not the billionaires, right? Um, and so basically, the ones who enforce standards and rules on the society is the middle class, which is kind of interesting. And so you can also see this with the mask mandates. So you see this with the mask mandates too. The upper classes ignore it because they think they are above the law. The lower classes a lot of times ignore it as they don't care, and the upper classes either thinks that they can't control them or they're too animalistic to care. So basically, they think uh, the middle class is animals too, but they they have other psychological operations that they have to run. Um, it is the middle class that most psychological operations are targeted against because the lower class is usually broken psychologically by poverty, and the upper class is the one running the psyops. So so you can see that the middle class is the one enforcing the mandates more than any mass mandates more than any other group, and so you can find this like most of the time. Um, it's gonna be some manager, some person who thinks they're much more important than than they are, that's going to try to say, hey, you should put on a mask, blah, blah, blah. This is my place, and stuff like that. Most of the hourly working people, they don't care. They're just trying to get through the day, uh, and they won't bring up the mask thing. They're just like, okay, you're not wearing a mask, fine. And they just treat you like a normal person. So it seems like, and maybe this is just from my own perspective, but it definitely seems like it's the middle class that, for some reason in societies, uh, creates and forms these things. And so if you don't conform to, uh, well, I don't know. Basically, whatever the moral standards are of the society are dictated by the middle class, and if you conform to those standards, you are allowed to be middle class. If you don't conform to the standards, you aren't. And so, if the middle class is a moral, upstanding people, you will end up in the middle class. If you're not a moral, upstanding person, um, you or not even more like let's say moral and upstanding is not what middle class people value, but that is the morals of society. Then you'll have a middle class that are just a bunch of degenerates, and the lower classes could be uh, the ones that are actually where it's more morality and upstandingness is thing. But eventually it will flip because the uh, the moral upstanding people will outlast those uh, who are being degenerates in the upper classes because a they're gonna have kids, so they're just gonna outbreed them over time, and two, it's just like you you're building your house on sand if you live a moral and degenerate life. You're not building it on a rock, from that parable, as it were. Um, and so their house, while they might have a big one right now, will crumble and fall. Where you have the bedrock to make it back. So yeah, you might fall down a class or two or something like that just because um, actual morality isn't valued in your society right now. But eventually you will secede them, or not secede, but supplant them, and your it's then up to you to maintain those moral standards within your society. And if you can somehow make it so that those moral standards are followed by the lower classes, then in my opinion, that basically takes care of the upper classes at that point because the upper classes are such a small percentage of the people that they are just going to be forced to live a moral because otherwise they will just be removed. Like it will not be tolerated. If the middle class and the lower class are moral people and the upper class are just acting like degenerates, they're just going to be guillotined. So um, that and they're going to be well aware of that. So they will maybe begrudgingly at first act in the manner, and then eventually, uh, you can only fake it so much before it actually becomes habit, and then eventually they might actually just become moral people. You know, like as annoying as the churchians and stuff like that can be, a lot of times those people can get snapped out of it if there is like a moral person with a foundation because they'll kind either they're actually snakes like wolves in sheep clothing type people and they're trying to actively deceive you and they're snakes, but sometimes it can just be a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation of like the Bible and stuff like that. And so when they see this other actual moral standing that uh, isn't made up on sand, their views and stuff like that will crumble. And then once, because theirs is on sand, and once they crumble, they'll come and build their foundation on the rocks. So I just don't think uh, the Churchian thing only works in a corrupt, immoral society. I don't think there are aspects of it that will always exist because the devil, you can't get rid of the devil, but they're much more limited and in the shadows, much more in an actual moral society. So that kind of concludes my random thoughts on stuff. Hopefully, you guys find it interesting. Comment anything that you find interesting on Social Galactic or the comment section on these, and hopefully, you guys have a good day. Goodbye.